everyone, we're back this week for another City Council recap. How are you doing today, Matt?
Doing okay. Our meeting didn't go too late. We got out of there around 6 o'clock. So that was a mercifully short council meeting this week.
That's always good when it ends early. So
Yeah.
let's jump into the recap for this week. Let's start off with redistricting. Could you explain more about the timeline for that?
Yeah, sure. So this was a small but important item. We didn't have a lot of discussion. We just approved it as part of our consent calendar, but it's worth noting for everyone in the community that we are doing our once a decade redistricting. So it's based on the census. So the US federal government leads a census process that identifies how many people we have and where they all live, and then lower levels of government redraw districts based on changes in population. And so the city is now going through this process. Because of COVID, that census data was delayed, so we are behind schedule, but people should just know that proposed new maps for the districts will come out in December. There will be a period of time for public input, and then in January, the council should be approving our new maps. So I certainly hope I don't lose any neighborhoods in District 10. I think our population's been pretty stable, so I don't anticipate our District 10 boundaries changing too much. But if we lose anyone, we'll say goodbye and hand them off to another council member, which would be very sad. And if we gain any areas, we'll be sure to welcome them into the District 10 family. So that's about it for now, but we'll keep people posted as we get later into the year.
Yes, this redistricting only happens once every 10 years, so definitely a big deal.
Yeah.
Early in the meeting, you also extended the city's emergency proclamation. So could you elaborate more on what that means?
Yeah, so this is the COVID emergency proclamation, and functionally the reason we extend this, I believe we only extend it for 60 days, and so every 2 months we do this. It technically or legally, it just allows the city to still be eligible for certain sources of funds from the federal and state government. So that's the reason to keep that open. But then we had a larger presentation from staff on our COVID case rate, which unfortunately is going up because of Delta. We talked about ICU capacity, which is still looking pretty good locally, thankfully. Luckily, we believe have the highest level of vaccinations amongst any of the major cities in America. So that's a good thing, and it is reducing the severity of the cases, even though we are, of course, seeing or hearing a lot about these breakthrough cases where people are vaccinated or still contracting COVID, but they're much less likely to go to the hospital, which is a great thing. So we had a whole update on that. I'll just highlight two other things that came up during that conversation that I think are relevant to folks. So one is something we should celebrate, which is, since the beginning of COVID, the city has delivered. We've been the lead agency in our county for distributing meals to those who are food insecure because they've lost a job, they've lost income. And overall now we're at the milestone of having delivered over 180 million meals in our county. And so that's just a mind-boggling number. I mean, it's something to celebrate in the sense that the city quickly pivoted, redeployed staff from PRNS and other places to address this very real need. Of course, the flip side of that is there are a lot of people in our community who are food insecure, who have lost jobs and income. And while the numbers have come down a bit, they're still quite high. They haven't come down too much. I mean, since the peak, I think they're only down, I believe we heard it was something on the order of 10 to 20%. So there's still a lot of need out there, and we're especially worried about as we head into the holiday season. And so we'll probably be keeping people updated on ways that they can support our local food bank and ways that you can get involved in that. But that's something I just thought was interesting from the presentation that people should be aware of, is that there is a lot of food insecurity in our community. And it's kind of hard to take care of other things if you're not even sure where your next meal is going to come from. So we'll talk more about that in the future. The other thing that I think is unfortunately more of a challenge in terms of our local government execution has been rent relief. We went through some of the barriers yesterday. I actually requested more data. So there's a lot of money that is flowing down from the federal and state government to address this huge renter debt cliff that is coming. So when the eviction moratoria end, we're very worried that tenants who owe back rent are going to be evicted, and many of them could become homeless or otherwise it would just be a devastating personal experience for them. And so the idea is that there are public funds out there to try to unwind that debt, to basically make landlords whole so that they can continue to do what they do and forgive tenants' debt using public funds. The problem is the deployment's very hard. It's very hard to get the proper documentation, whose name is on the lease, and do they have a pay stub, or are they paid in cash? Or, I mean, not everyone has all of that documentation readily available. So it's a very labor intensive process that staff is going through. I think my interest in this is figuring out how are we performing week over week? Can we put more staffing on it? Do we need to put more resources into it? We need to address this problem before the eviction moratoria are lifted so that we don't end up with thousands and thousands of residents being displaced because they owe a couple of months worth of rent. So in California, statewide, I can tell you, we have 800,000 Californians who owe an average of $4,400 in back rent. So that's probably 2 to 3 months for most people. And the money's there. The state has set aside $5 billion. There's federal funds. Now we've got to identify the people who have that debt, identify the landlords, make the landlord whole, and get the debt removed. And it's just a very slow and cumbersome process. So there's going to be more to say on that. I'm very focused on that issue because I think it's one of the most important challenges facing our community.
Definitely. All those issues impact a lot of residents, so certainly an important discussion to have and to continue having. And last item for this recap, Council received an IT strategic plan report. So could you explain what that report entails?
Sure, and I sit on the Smart Cities and Services Improvement Committee, so we already saw this in our committee meeting last month. And yes, essentially this is the 2-year roadmap for our IT work plan. We have as with most things, thinly staffed, not well-resourced IT team, and yet they do a fantastic job with the resources they do have. They've gone from being, frankly, 5-10 years ago, nobody thinking of San Jose, unfortunately, despite being in the heart of Silicon Valley, being very technology forward, to being recognized, actually receiving awards for some of the innovation that we've done. And so, and I think our 311 app, while imperfect, is light years ahead of where it was just a few years ago. So there has been progress. The roadmap laid out essentially strategic goals and investments we want to make. And I won't go into all of the details. Let me just mention 2 things that we discussed that I think are important. So one was on the topic of equity and using data analytics to identify gaps in service and then improve delivery of service to underserved communities. So we have a lot of resources out there that are not always available to or known about by or taken advantage of the people who most need them. And so as we try to ensure that we're running city services for everyone and to benefit the entire community, that ability to analyze, well, who's accessing services and where, and how can we expand access and improve outcomes is really important. So we talked a bit about that. We actually have a new data equity lead role that we are hiring for to integrate data sets so that we can understand where there's food insecurity and low vaccination rates and childcare available at the library, and start to actually think holistically about how we're serving the community. So I'm excited about that progress. The other thing that I think is related, but is kind of an almost broader topic, is ensuring that as we digitize services, that it isn't just an IT project. It's not enough to just digitize the front end for residents who are reporting a concern or who are accessing a service. We have to make sure that the back end process, the staff that's actually completing that, the tools that they're using, that all is reformed and improved and innovated on as well. Because if we can't follow through, then no matter how shiny the front end is with newfangled technologies like the 311 app, it doesn't really matter. We're not delivering that great user experience and that outcome that the resident wants. And so one example of this has been abandoned vehicles. We've had a lot of folks report abandoned vehicles and then never know what happened because there's been such a high volume that the team that implements the follow-up, the code enforcement, has been overwhelmed. And so then we're kind of creating a false promise. We're saying you can report this, but then we're not closing the loop with you. And so having worked in technology for years, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. And I just want to make sure that we're thinking not just about the technology, but we're thinking about the people and the process and the culture at City Hall, and ensuring that we're delivering that full cycle of follow through to really completing the task and making sure that the resident knows what happened, and that we do it in a timely and efficient manner. So anyway, that was part of the conversation. That's something I'm always pushing on. I thought was just relevant to share with folks, but I've probably gone on long enough. It was a pretty focused meeting, which I appreciated. And yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to put together this video, Sammy.
Thank you for recapping it all for us, Matt.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.